Hey guys, Ryan Dement from Chasing Happiness Podcast. I hope you guys are having a great day. On the podcast today, we have Skylar Fleming. Skylar is the host of Money Talk with Skylar Fleming. Skylar, welcome into the podcast.
Hey, nice to be here.
Great to have you on. So, we have a little bit of a similar background. We have some financial coaching and some different things we'll talk about. But before we get there, why not share with the listeners a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm really young, and I think that kind of obviously plays to my benefit because everyone in the financial realm says, I wish I would have started when I was younger. So I consider myself really lucky in that aspect. And that is kind of what's led me to want to talk about it more, hence the Money Talk with Skylar Fleming podcast. But what brought me here was really I started working in finance in a credit union. I was in a call center, so I would see everything from hundreds and hundreds of dollars of overdraft fees to millions and millions of dollars in an account. I seen it all, dealt with pretty much every situation in my years working there, and that led me to things like Dave Ramsey and all those other personal finance voices. And I really wanted to make sure I was focused on like budgeting and those simple first steps when it comes to money. And then when my wife and I got married in August of 2020, we made sure it was an emphasis for us to blend our finances together because we wanted to be united on that front. And I think the one thing that really drove me to want to share and do better with finance was there was one time her and I were sitting down talking about our budget, and it lasted for like 3 hours, which was terrible. Like such a long time. And I mean, it was fine for me. I love looking at numbers and looking at spreadsheets, but my wife just had to like bite down and get through that sort of thing. Like it was not a good time. So I think really that was kind of a point where we're like, okay, we got to figure out how to optimize this for us. And that led me down a road of just a bunch of research trying to figure out how I can optimize our finances. And really it's led me to say, hey, I have a really broad knowledge of finance. And it's led me to say, hey, I want to share that with people, talk about it with people. And that led to the podcast and the website.
That's cool. So, numbers sounds like it's your game. Talk a little bit about some of the financial coaching you've done in the past, and some of the guiding points that you work with when you were doing or you are doing financial coaching.
Yeah. So yeah, like you mentioned, I've done financial coaching in the past. It's more morphed into a podcast now to just share what I know. But in the past with financial coaching, it was mainly a lot of helping my family get better financial grounds. I've helped people online with different calls and things like that. But one of the things that I think is really crucial of a first step is just to start of what happens in the event of an emergency, because you might think you're prepared, you have insurances and things like that, but ultimately when the moment happens that there is an emergency, you're probably not going to know what to do unless you have like a plan written down or something that you know, hey, here's what's going to happen. Then it can just turn into chaos quickly.
So, how can someone prepare for that? So, I know about the emergency fund. I get that. I preach it, but I preach it in a different way. I preach it in the sense of, hey, you need to cut your damn credit cards up and you need to start moving to a cash basis. And especially with inflation, if you're just trying to go out there and keep up the Joneses and spend on those credit cards, it's just killing you. And then that emergency comes along and you have nothing to show and you got to put it back on the credit card.
Hmm.
How do you approach that emergency? And then what does that look like in the sense of the Dave Ramsey weighs $1,000 or 3 to 6 months? What's your approach? How do
Um,
you handle it?
yeah, I think I definitely start with the 3 to 6 months plan, and then because I think it's a great foundation to have. And before you start getting complex with like, hey, where are we putting our emergency fund so that it's like trying to optimize it and make more money with it, sort of thing, at different high yield bank accounts. It's just a matter of get the foundational things in place and then don't worry so much about those optimizing things like where is it making the most money. I have so much money in an emergency fund, should I be investing part of it? Like things can get really complex really quickly, and if you try to take too big of steps, you're just going to confuse yourself and really not know where to turn. And I like your point with just cut up the credit cards. If you don't have an emergency fund, you absolutely shouldn't be worrying about trying to optimize credit cards or having them at all. Like you need to start from the basis and work your way up to anything like that where you're optimizing any sort of spending or earning interest and stuff on your emergency fund.
So with the emergency fund, I always this is the piece that I dwell on very quickly. I was just helping a young lady last week and this week. Unfortunately, she had to file bankruptcy, Chapter 13. She repaid her debt. It was discharged, um, but now she wants to buy a house. Most lenders will not touch her, unfortunately, to give her a mortgage for 12 to 24 months. Some will be sooner, but so forth. So we talked about emergency fund. She has a good paying job. She has zero debt now. She's renting. Um, she's saving up to buy a car, but she hasn't really put anything away on the side for an emergency fund or a savings account, whatever you want to call it. And we were on Zoom and she looked at me like I was dumbfounded, like, why would I need to do that? And eh, I asked her, I said, "You have 0 debt now. You get a clean slate and get to change
Hmm.
everything, but how are you gonna pay for an emergency or anything that comes up?" And she goes, "Well, I already got a credit card already." And I'm like, "Oh
Yeah,
god."
going right back down the trap.
Yes, and that's a hard conversation to have with people, and they just don't realize that they're just putting themselves in the same predicament again, but at the same time you can't help everybody, and I know that. How do you approach those type of people, and what's some good advice that people can get from this conversation about, hey, credit cards aren't the thing?
Yeah, I think ultimately directing people towards the behavior instead of the math behind finance is where I like to take those conversations, because it's easy for people to see, hey, the math works because I only have to pay $100 a month on all this, but it's the behavior behind, you're putting everything on a credit card and then an emergency happens, and which credit card are you going to put it onto? You probably don't have one because they're all maxed out, and then you're like trying to get money from family and friends, and it leads to like bad relationships because people don't think you're trustworthy because you're always looking for money and that sort of stuff when emergencies happen. So I think just getting rid of the credit cards helps the most right at the beginning, because it forces you to keep track of your own money. Because, like I said, it's easy to say, hey, the math works on $100 a month, but the math doesn't work on your 3,000 a month spending because you don't actually make that much money. So I think if you're relying solely on the math to say, hey, it's working for me, I can do this, see if the math still works without the credit card, and if it doesn't, that's how you can know you have a problem.
And you've already started to touch the second point I was wanting to talk about is income, and working with people to find better ways to earn income. And I say better ways is they can get a better job, especially in this market.
Mm-hmm.
But some people seem to think that they don't deserve a better job, and that's a big hurdle that I see in my coaching on a daily basis. What are some hurdles from your side when it comes to income and income sources?
Yeah, the stuff I see, every it's likely that if someone started working after you, right? Like if someone just got hired doing your same job, they're probably making more money than you if you're not like actively asking for raises and stuff like that. Because like you said, in this market, you could go find any job you want. You could go start out at some entry level position and make a decent entry level wage. But if you're in those entry level positions, or not like deep into a career, people starting in the same position might be making similar or more than you, even though you have more experience. So I think that for me and my wife really like flipped the switch in our mind to say like, hey, we're worth more than that, and we know that. And I think putting a little bit of pressure on your employer to acknowledge that, but then you have to be willing to take the step that it might be, and that's finding a new job, like having your resume prepared, or just whatever it takes to say, hey, I know I'm worth more. And I think the unlock, like I said, for me was realizing that people now are getting paid what we were getting paid just for brand new starts and things like that.
Yeah, that's sorry, it's my dog, and I'll edit us out. I'm giving him a second.
That's all good.
So that is good. That's good information, and also having the confidence to be able to get another job and be able to get paid more for what you're worth, that also lacks at times. But The other piece that I see on a daily basis is spending habits, and I call it keeping up with the Joneses. Other people say other things. How do you handle spending, and what type of direction and what type of help do you give individuals when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think as far as handling spending goes, I recently came across some information that talked about like some great ways to start with cutting your spending. And the first one was just cutting down like your bills, like those things like insurance and stuff that you just kind of let auto renew because your price increases on those quite a bit. So it's taking those things that really all it is for those is a phone call saying, "Hey, I got a," or do a quick quote online and say, "I got a quote that's cheaper than what you guys are giving me. What can you guys do for this?" And they're going to make it cheaper. They want to keep you as a customer. And if they don't, switch. It's not hard. Like it's easier to change insurances than it is a job. So, and that's making you probably close to 100 if not more a month just on your insurance depending on like how many people you have and stuff. But I think as far as helping managing your spending, taking 1 month statement of your bank or credit card or whatever you're using to spend and looking it over and actually realizing how much you're spending in certain places. I know a lot of banks and credit unions have tools, or you can use all the free and online tools and stuff that'll categorize everything for you. And that for me was one time many years ago, me and one of my friends realized we were spending like over $100 a month on eating out, and we were just coming out of high school, so that's quite a bit of money for us at that time. And I'm glad that happened then, so that it's only a few hundred instead of several many hundreds of dollars on something that's rather unnecessary, but especially when you're trying to make progress in your finances, very unnecessary. Like if you're up to your eyeballs in debt, that those sort of realizations that can happen just through looking at the categories for your expenses can really help you change what you're doing in that aspect.
And it's hard, especially when you're spending and you don't know where it's coming from or where it's going and what you
Mm-hmm.
have coming in, and being able to budget. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I struggled with debt early on in life, and the budget was my worst enemy at first because I thought I was better than that, and it ended up being my best friend, and being able to understand where everything was going, and it
Mm-hmm.
really shed some light on what I was spending my money on, and it was stupid things, and stupid things added up to debt, and that just didn't work, and it just I think I read this a few weeks ago. The number one stress we have as Americans or humans, whatever, is money. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have enough money and you're living paycheck to paycheck, life is tough.
Yeah, a phrase that I like is like money doesn't buy happiness, but the absence of it will definitely leave you sad. Like you won't have happiness if you're broke, like if you're just flat broke and don't have any money. But again, on the spending thing, along the same lines as decreasing your bills, it's looking at subscriptions, which will come with like just tracking your expenses in general. And like you said, budgeting seems terrifying to most people. And I don't even think necessarily your first step has to be budgeting, but tracking your expenses and just understanding where your money's actually going. Because if you don't know where your money's going, it's going to be hard to say, hey, we need to put X amount of dollars in our fast food category because you don't know how much you actually spend. So I wouldn't worry so much about budgeting right out the gate, just saying, hey, where's all our money actually going?
So we get our spending together, and we're working our way through that. Next piece is, we have to start saving some money. We got to have a nest egg. Are you looking for retirement? Are you looking to invest in the stock market? Where are you at when you're talking about savings with clients and on your podcast?
Yeah, everything I preach automation through everything. There's a book, I believe it's called The Automatic Millionaire. It was one of my favorites when I listened to it. And it really helps uncover the power of automation. I don't think people really understand. And one of the key ideas it speaks to is the fact that if you just automate like 1% of your 1% of your income to go to a savings account or to a retirement account or investment account, you're going to learn to live without that money. And that's one of the things I tell all my family, friends, or clients, whoever I'm talking with, is just start small with automation and set it on an automatic increasing schedule. I know a lot of retirement plans with companies can do that, where every year it increases 0.5% or whatever, and you're going to learn how to live without that money. And you're going to be just fine. So I know saying right now put 10% of your money into the stock market or your retirement seems very intimidating for most people. Like they can't imagine living on however many hundreds of dollars less that is. But if you start out at like 2% and increase it gradually, you're going to get to that 10% and you're not even going to notice that it really happened. And honestly, you're not going to be able to really save unless you're thinking about the future. And I know that sounds like, well, of course we're thinking about the future, but like really sit down and have, I know the Ramsey team calls it like a dream meeting, like really just discuss what you want to do and what your plans are and say, how are we going to actually get to this? Because everyone wants to go on that grand European vacation for 2 months, but like, what are you actually going to do to get there?
And it's not easy, and it's a daily grind. I mean, just like being a business owner, entrepreneur, it's all a grind, and what you see up top is not what you're actually going through below the waterline. So it's consistency and persistence is what I talk about on a daily basis. And some people just don't have it, and I get it, and some people do. But sooner or later, I always have this saying, especially when I talk to somebody and they want to buy a home, but they're credit challenged or unbankable, as I say. I'm here when you're ready, because they're going to have to make some serious changes in their financial life, and debt is a huge issue, and how they handle the debt or what they do about the debt is a big thing. So debt for you, when you're talking to people on the podcast or coaching, is all debt good? I mean, is all debt bad, or is there some that's good?
I would generally say to stay away from it. I think, especially at the beginning, like if you're struggling to understand your spending or your expenses, stay away from all of it. I am in the area of like if you're doing really well with your finances, you can certainly look at that because I think once you start doing really well, you understand the intricacies of debt and like how it can actually possibly benefit you. So I don't say it's all bad, but it's something that most people probably shouldn't mess with.
Agreed. The only one I've got, I'm trying to get rid of the rest of it, is a mortgage. So got to work on that. But
Yeah,
that's
there you
that's
go.
the biggest. There's the biggest thing. But it's still a tax write off. But I'm working on it. Um, I don't talk a lot about it, but I know you do, and it's come up, retirement and, what it looks like, and I'm not into the retirement planning. I typically, at that point, will I'll give them the basics, and then I have some buddies, and then I also have some referrals that I send them out to financial planners that are gonna have more experience than I do when it comes to that stuff. They're all fiduciaries because I want them to be, or have my clients' best interest, not just because they're putting it out there. What topics and what are you talking around retirement?
Yeah, I like to just talk about dreaming about retirement and saying, hey, what do we want it to be? Because I think if you look long term and say this is our goal and work backwards from it, it's a lot easier to kind of reverse engineer your goals. And I like what you do with getting people to people that are professionals that are fiduciaries. I think that's something that's important, something I'll always preach and tell people. But I think financial independence is a huge goal for me and something that I uh, preach to people and tell people about really any chance I get. So figuring out your financial independence number is something that I like to talk about and say, hey, if we're looking at all this spending, here's how much money it's going to take for you to live on without having a job. And that can seem terrifying to people and kind of puts them in their place when they say, hey, we need to get that down because I want to be able to retire someday or be financially independent. But and my whole thing with the podcast with Money Talk is just talking about money, talking about what we want to do with it. Because I think there's such a stigma around talking about personal finances. And just a story to tell, I had someone very recently come up to me and start asking me and say, hey, I know you know a lot about personal finance, and I just had a couple questions about this. And you could tell it's a hard thing to just come up and ask someone because you feel vulnerable, you feel like I'm going to be judged. And I think that's something that just needs to be done away with, especially there's a lot of people that know a lot about money and can really help each other in small senses and directing people to professionals and things like that.
We all have some type of toxic relationship with money. We all have had something happen, or we're going through something. It's how you handle it. It's almost like a relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how I view it as. Is, money is unfortunately, like you said earlier, is not going to keep you happy and keep the road going. It can be bad too. So you have to be able to balance all those things out. But the biggest piece is being honest and open with yourself. and understanding the relationship you have with money, and then determine what you want to do. Do you want to move forward and change it or not? It just boils down to future and what that future is going to look like with money. Is it going to be laden with debt, or are you going to be debt free, or are you going to have a hybrid of something? I mean, everybody's different, but the one thing I can tell you is the way we're spending today, we just can't keep up with it. I mean, out here in Phoenix, man, these guys are buying $800,000 houses that are
Hmm.
worth 600 or 500,000, and they've got these fifth wheelers that are $200,000. I mean, I don't know how they're going to keep up with those payments at some point because
Hmm.
you can't just keep on laying on the debt and then expect it to work. I mean, how do you handle that when it comes to future and where people go with their futures and where they're at today?
Yeah, people need to be realistic with like how things impact their long term like planning and stuff. Like you said, people in your area are buying massive, expensive houses. Same things happen in northern Utah. Everything's way overpriced. But I see it a lot too with brand new vehicles on the road. Like those are going to just cripple your finances in the long run. And if you would just take the monthly payment you're making towards an auto loan that you can make because you think you can afford it and put it in some sort of investment account, you're going to be able to buy really nice cars in the long run, especially when you're making 7, 8, 9 year auto loans, like some of them getting really, really long. Like that kind of time frame for an investment is really great. And your return on your investment is going to be way better putting that money in the stock market than also paying interest on top of it. So I think people just need to realize how big of an impact debt, and especially unnecessary debt like brand new vehicles and things like that, is going to be in the long term, because you're going to lose a lot of money not only to interest and like how long you're making the payments, but kind of your opportunity cost of not having it in the stock market.
And there's a long road with that you're paying out your lenders and you're paying for their mansions, you're paying for their Mediterranean cruises.
Yeah.
You're paying a lot of people's bills. You're putting their kids to college. So at some point, you have to become a little more wiser with the money and understand that, the I'm a little older than you, so you can see the gray in all this if people are watching. Uh, Back in the day, you couldn't travel without a credit card. And some people today still come up and tell me, I can't travel without a credit card. I said, sure you can. You can travel with a debit card. I
Mm-hmm.
rent I rent cars with my debit card. I rent hotel rooms. I can do Airbnb. I can do VRBO. Uh, buy a plane ticket. You
Mm-hmm.
don't need a credit card for any of that stuff. And it's like one of the biggest things I hear from a generation that's a little bit older than me is that I need to have a credit card. I want the points. And last year,
Good
I think,
marketing.
yeah, 2.5 billion miles or points expired because people didn't use them. So I don't
Yeah.
know what that translates into dollars because they're all different. But at the end of the day, that's a lot of points in miles that expired that people didn't use, but they racked up the credit card debt to get it.
Yeah, and I can imagine all the spending that has to go into getting those, because you're only getting 1, 2, maybe 5% back if you're lucky. And if you do the math on that, that billions of numbers is just even higher. And then let's not forget that every time, like if you miss a payment, they're taking all those points back, like, or you don't have access to redeem them. Or I even saw when I was working at a credit union during COVID, like there's only so much they can do to try to help in situations that are really unfortunate. But when we're in normal times, lenders and stuff don't want to help. Like they don't, they just want their money. And if that means extra fees, that means they're getting more money. So like it's all taking your own best interest to heart. And if is your best interest having that brand new vehicle, or is it having the really nice vehicle and the nice vacations and the nice house when you're retired and can actually afford all of it after years and years of hard work and investing and saving money?
Very true. Very, very true. Skylar, it has been an honor for you to be on. It's been a great conversation. Love to have you back and talk more money because there's not a lot of us talking money. And unfortunately, I call it's not sexy.
Yeah.
And we all have relationships with money that needs to be tweaked a little bit at times. And it doesn't hurt to talk about it. It's healthy.
Yeah, that's the whole premise behind my podcast is let's just talk about it more. Let's keep it simple with each other. Let's not try to tell each other about everything from budgeting to investing. Let's just do it one thing at a time and take our time, because we have a lot of time, honestly. Like that's what they say, Like, I wish I would have started earlier so I had more time investing, but also we have a lot of time to make corrections and still to figure out what we actually want to do with our money.
I'll definitely link your podcast in the show notes and I will share that out. Um, I will also put your website in there too for the listeners.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. It's,
You
yeah, Money Talk with Skylar Fleming. You can search it anywhere to find it. I'm sure if you search it on Google, it'll pull up my website or the podcast. The website is moneytalk.skylarfleming.com. So a little bit long there, but look for the link in the show notes and it'll take you right there.
Well, thank you, sir. I hope to talk to you soon, have you back on the podcast, and I hope you have a good day.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.